Currently reading the
There's me in the middle
yeah.
with Joseph holding me.
Oh wow.
And let me turn this down.
Oh,
Joseph made this.
you're putting on Ankara. Wow.
Joseph made it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hi there, viewers. Today, I'm joining a conversation with author Jim Darling, the author of Because of You, I Lost Everything. It's a pleasure to have Jim on the show. Welcome on the show, Jim.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to finally have you and have a conversation with you after reading your book because I really love your book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, Jim, you've written Because of You, I Lost Everything, which is a true story told from the eye of a missionary kid. And I'm curious to ask you, why did you write this book? I mean, what inspired you to write Because of You, I Lost Everything?
Well, I chose not to write it,
Oh,
and it sat for like 40 years.
oh, wow.
The ideas until one day my mom said, "You need to write it." And I spent my life trying to be like my dad, trying to develop kind of skills he had, the heart he has. And so I spent a lifetime preparing to write the book.
Oh, that's great. That's quite great to know. And I would say, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I found something significant in your book where, like, when you were trying to compare and construct spirituality concept among Africans to the people in the Western world, you wrote that Africans understood that everything that happens in the natural world was because of a spirit, and that every good and bad event was driven by the spirit in the world. And on the other way around, the Westerners focus on natural causes. I'm curious to ask you, which of this concept do you think is real? Would you say that this assertion of African belief is an exaggeration, or will you say that it is true that the happenings of the world are spiritually influenced? Or do you agree with the Western perception that they naturally caused? I just want to have your idea about this. I'm just curious.
Well, I am so thankful for the African influence upon my beliefs.
Oh, wow.
I realized that I could have been caught in the Western trap here. With the eyes, it's just cause and event. But the spirit world creates what the eyes see. And the spirits are involved in every part. What I have since moved on past that initial belief that the spirits are involved in everything, to the point where it's not just the spirit world, both the good and the bad, but it's all about keeping the eyes on Jesus. It's not about what the evil spirits do. It's about walking the calling, putting the steps where God has ordained them, being faithful to his leadership. It's in the spirit world, it's the eyes on him. And for those who are not made peace with God, there's no spirit which is good from their viewpoint.
Well, that's great because, that concept, I really agree with your concept about the African spirituality, because that's what most people here in the African, well, I'm an African, that's what we seem to believe. We believe that, the spirit influences the physical. And sometimes when good or bad happens to human being, we kind of think in the spiritual way. That's one of the reasons why I brought up the question to ask, to know your own perception about that.
And so it's very important, because Westerners cannot see all these stories where the Africans understand how the spirits were involved. They don't understand the stories. They don't understand. But yes, you're right.
Wow, that's great. In your book, also, you talked a lot about your dad's ministry and his passion for winning souls to Christ, and how he taught multitude about the love of God. I found several sections of this category and that of your dad's work quite captivating. And I would like you to tell us more about your dad's administration. That'll be fine, right?
My dad, my dad had a passion for lost souls.
Wow.
That was his calling. That was his heartbeat. And he would look at every passage, no matter the subject, and he would see how to win souls through it.
Wow.
My dad, as a child, he called himself the poorest of the poor. Even the poor people made fun of him and bullied him. And many people picked on him. And so my dad grew strong where he was willing to take the bullying and the beatings and just and he did, and instead of making him bitter, it made his heart grow big. So even when he came to Africa, so often it was the poorest and the least experienced that welcomed the gospel first.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad wasn't reaching up trying to make a success. He was reaching down to those whom he could grab and pull in.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. That's great because I really read quite a lot about him, and his stories are very, very pulling and inspiring. There's also an important character, or I would say personality, in your book called Joseph. A Muslim man
Oh,
who gave his life to Christ and whose family member and friend rejected him and even sought to kill him. Now, Jim, please tell us a bit about Joseph.
Joseph was our parents' first convert in Africa. He came to Christ, and when he came to Christ, my dad gave him 24 hours to tell his family about Christ. My dad understood that if you hide from the bullies and you hide and you don't let people know that you're a Christian, then the gospel will become your shame. And people say, why didn't you tell me? You're embarrassed of your God. And so he gave Joseph 24 hours. And Joseph knew the cost because he was Nigerian. He understood the cost. And he went and told his family, he told his friends, and his dad put his finger in his face and said, you are no longer my son. Leave and never, ever come back.
Wow.
40 of his friends said, Joseph will die. Wow. And they pledged to never eat again until Joseph was dead. And so Joseph could not go out in public alone. One day, my dad had enough. And he went into the African neighborhood. He was the only white man there. Knocked on the door of the leader of the group. And he said, we know who you are. We know where you live. What do you think will happen to you if you kill Joseph? The guy thought about it for a moment and realizing that he would spend his life in prison for killing Joseph, said, okay, Joseph can live. And after that, Joseph could go out freely. And Joseph, he went back to Nigeria once with us. I went one time. And we took him to the trail that led to his village. And he was gone about 15 minutes, and he came back really sad because he went to tell his father and his mother how much he loved them and how much he cared for them. And his father wanted to make peace with Joseph on his terms. Did you bring me a card? Did you bring me money? Did you bring me a present? And Joseph kept saying, I love you, Dad. I came to tell you I love you. And because Joseph did not bribe his dad, he once again saw that finger, said, get out and leave, and never, ever return.
Wow.
There's a little bit about Joseph that you don't know. When I went back in the summer of 2019, I saw Joseph. He's like 96 now.
Wow.
He made me this.
Oh, yeah. Ankara.
He made it. You recognize this is Nigeria made.
Yeah, I know. It's Ankara.
Uh-huh. He made this for me.
Oh, wow.
He was my best African friend.
Oh.
And if you look at my book cover, they're witnessing. They're at this baptismal. There's me standing on a canoe and Joseph holding me. Joseph went around with my dad to help him start many churches.
Wow.
Joseph was an incredible man. Something else you don't know that's not in the book. When my parents first became called to become missionaries, they were appointed to Nigeria. But because of the fighting in Nigeria at the time in 69 and 68, my parents ended up going to Ivory Coast, Africa.
Yeah.
But the first 25 churches my parents started were Nigerian. He found every Nigerian community he could and went and started a church there.
Wow. That's beautiful. I love this.
And Joseph went with him.
I love Joseph's story. It's quite interesting. I love the story. And thanks for sharing more of that. Now, please tell us about some of the persecution or challenges that your dad encountered in Ivory Coast. I read of a part you wrote that whenever it turns on the generator, someone will plug one of the extension cords. Wherever and everywhere would turn dark. And I found that part very hilarious. And I would love you to tell us more about this. And of course, other challenges that you encountered.
Well, I went with my dad once. Back then, the generators were so loud. It was like an airplane. So you had to put them very far away.
Yeah.
Far, far away. And when there would be many extension cords. And so the Africans would go and they would unplug them. And
wow.
Sometimes that one time that I remember best, it's like every minute or two. And I asked my dad, aren't you afraid? He said, no. See, my dad had faced his share of bullies. And my dad learned not to grow mean or hateful or angry. He just said, I just go plug it back in. I said, what about if they keep plugging it, unplugging it? He said, wow. I will keep plugging it in until I finish the move.
Oh, wow.
And he did. And he kept doing it until he finished the movie. That movie that he directed, not directed, but he had made.
That's great. You know, when I actually read that part, it got me laughing because it's actually something that people do very well. Even here in Nigeria, some people will just do it intentionally because of their wickedness.
Yes. One more problem that he had
Okay.
was that he would go to churches and he would obviously see what they needed to do. My dad's goal was to reach all of Ivory Coast for Christ. And they would say, my dad would suggest something. The Africans would talk to my dad gently. He said, what you suggested won't work here. You're not African, you're American, you don't understand. And that's a strange concept because they had decided to take God, the same God that my dad gave them, and they had chosen to be like my dad, but his plans won't work. and and so they would have this business meeting, and my dad would they would try to solve this problem, and in a very African way, somebody would come up with an idea. Then the most important person of the group would restate it. Then the second most important person would state it. Everybody would have their turn saying the same thing. And a long time later, after my dad just sat there totally emotionless, not saying a thing, they would ask Dad, well, what do you think? My dad would, yes, yes. And then they were all pleased. Then my dad wouldn't say anything else. Then they would look at him some more. Well, you want to say something about it? The idea you had is so good. What about this? And then they would start the same routine. They would talk about it. Somebody would have a genius of an idea. And then they would go through the pecking order again. Then they would ask Dad. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours later, they would finally solve all the issues. That was terribly slow for my dad. But for the Africans, they went from being not knowing anything about Christ to becoming spiritual giants in hours.
Wow.
Because they finally understood their calling.
Oh, that's great. That's quite fascinating to know. There's another section of your book that was titled The Movie. And that's a particular chapter titled The Movie. That's how a young man told his father that he accepted Jesus, and how the father visited a witch doctor to deal, I would say, with him. And that he may renounce, so that he can renounce Jesus. And it is amazing how the witch doctor gave him a poison and a cure and the backlash. This part is really captivating. Please tell us more about it. I'd love to hear more of this story from you.
Well, it is hilarious. This man became a Christian, and the father and the family, they all opposed him. And they told the son that he needed to come back to the ways of the fathers, back to his heritage and to the gift that his ancestors had given him, so that he would honor his legacy and honor the wisdom given to him. And he said, I can't, because I found God, I found Jesus, and he loves me. And so they came up with this plan where they would give Joseph a poison, and the poison wouldn't kill, but the poison would make somebody wish they were dead. And after 3 or 4 days, it would wear off. But there was also this cure that if that he could give to Joseph when Joseph was begging for his life, given this cure only on the condition that he would denounce Jesus. That was the plan. So when Joseph was about to walk through the gate, the whole family took the cure and they each swallowed a little bit. Then they put the poison in the gate. So when he walked through, it would be on his feet and would go through his skin and make him very sick. Well, they all ate the poison. When Joseph walked through, nothing happened to him. And they kept looking at Joseph, wondering when he was going to get sick, and nothing happened to him. All of a sudden, they were all sick. And they were moaning and crying and screaming and rolling on the ground. And this man had no idea what was going on.
Wow.
And they explained it to him. They explained between the screaming that there was this poison, and evidently they had gotten all confused. And they poured the cure in the ground and they swallowed the poison.
Wow, can you imagine?
And they had to confess, your God is greater than the spirits.
Absolutely.
Of our ancestors,
Absolutely.
of our fathers.
Absolutely.
That I remember when I was young, real young, maybe 6 or 7, 8, somewhere along in there. My dad and another missionary were picking the actors to play in this movie. And this movie, my dad would go out and show it. Many people would come to Christ. And other missionaries of all denominations would go into villages, and the villages stayed closed. They would not accept Jesus. They would not walk with God. They would not leave the spirit world and all of its fears. And they came and they requested and said, why should you be the only ones who can show the movie? So they released the movie. And within 2 years, 2 million people all over West Africa came to know Christ.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot.
And that movie is still being shown to this day. It's called Le Combat.
Wow.
It is in French. It can be pulled up on the web. Yet, but it can be seen.
Oh, wow. I love to see it. That's great. That's quite fascinating to know. That's very great. I'm also curious to know if you experienced any challenges while writing this book. And if there's any, could you share with us on how you ultimately overcame it?
Well, yes. I had gotten cancer, and I was so very sick for 7 years. And during those 7 years, near the end of those 7 years, I wrote the book. 3 times a doctor said, I have no hope for you. Each time was for a different reason. And I was so sick, I couldn't travel anywhere. I would teach from a chair where I could lay back. I was really sick. And I just hadn't, they were giving me no hope. But through this, God reaffirmed to me, you're my child. All this heartache is so that you might understand what it's like to lose everything and still walk in the joy of the Lord.
Wow. Wow. When I actually saw your book, I lost everything. It got me remembering a particular song. I lost it all. I forgot the title. I'll pull it up before we stop this interview. Probably you might know the song, but that's quite an experience. That's quite an experience. Now, I would love to
Thank
move
you.
into my next question. As a child, how did you cope and blend with the African lifestyle? I read of how mosquito bites you whenever you sleep, how people shake your hand and in the hard way that you almost felt pain, and how some people will gather around
Hmm.
you and your sister admiring her hair, and how some people pinch you as a kid, among many others funny scenarios. And as a child, did you have that consciousness that you were in a different place entirely based on how people receive you or based on people's reaction, behavior, and what life in Africa was like as at then?
I did not look at it that way.
Oh, okay, great.
I saw my dad's calling to win Ivory Coast for Christ.
Oh, wow.
It burned in my heart. I wanted to do everything I could to walk with my parents to help them win Ivory Coast for Africa. So when in a matter of 30 seconds, 150 people would pinch me. I mean, that happened again and again and again. We would go to a church that my parents had started, and they would pinch us just to see if our skin felt like black skin. They would pull our hair to see if our hair was like African hair. They would feed us food that was so hot with pepper that it would make us sick. But
Wow,
we would do that gratefully.
wow, wow. That's
They
great.
would squeeze our hands so hard that they would roll the knuckles and bring tears to the eyes, but you put it out eagerly. That was just my viewpoint.
Oh, wow. Thanks for adding that to it. Because when I actually read that part, it was quite hilarious, and I said I was going to ask you about it. Now, could you tell us a bit about your friend Kojo and your sister Julia? Just a bit. I'd love to know more about them from you.
Well, well, Julia
Yeah.
one day was sitting on uh, my dad's shoulders, and they went to the yearly parade, Independence Parade, and the people were packed in so tightly where there was no space to move. If the crowd moved, sometimes you couldn't move your feet,
Oh.
and they would just knock you over, and the whole crowd, as the police would beat back the people at the front.
Hmm.
The but they were there, and mom and my older sister and I were way in the back because we didn't want to be so crowded. And one day a man reached in my dad's pocket and pulled out his wallet. Well, my dad was never afraid of bullies. And so his initial reaction was to put Julia down as he was running and went after the man. And he went after the man, running just as hard and fast as he could. And my dad was an incredible athlete, and he caught up with him, grabbed him,
Wow.
and that man was screaming, "I did not steal your wallet. I did not steal your wallet." Of course, right here, way above his head, was the wallet in his hand. And so
I read that part.
my dad got the wallet back, and the Africans around him said, "You just leave him to us. We'll take care of you."
Hmm.
And so my dad left, and he went back to try to find Julia. Well, somebody could be close enough to touch, but you can't see him in a crowd that big. And so when my dad got near, he saw the super tall African man. He had picked up Julia and set him on his shoulders. And from a distance, you could see Julia, the only white person that could be seen in the area. And my dad walked up to him, so thankful to get Julia back. He didn't even realize he had set Julia down.
Wow.
And so that affected Julia greatly.
Oh, wow.
Kwadwo
Yeah.
was the most incredible athlete I have ever known.
Oh.
We would play every afternoon soccer in my backyard. And he got so good that by the time he turned 11, he was getting pro offers. They wanted the best teams in Ivory Coast wanting to sign up his rights so that he would only play for them. And Kwadwo never wanted to play pro because he knew he was so good one day he'd get hurt. He would train his eye where he could, from one point to another, however far apart, he would know. He would know just from looking how long it was, and he rarely ever missed it by more than this. So he was just such an incredible. He was honest. He brought me back a pair of pliers I had left out one day.
Oh, wow.
And that would have been his most treasured gift if he had kept them. I would never have known.
Wow.
Just honest, incredibly skilled. And one day he went back to see his mom in the village. And this story even seemed too big for Kwadwo, but it wasn't. He went back to the village to see his mom, and some other men from another village came to visit.
Oh.
And my dad, they had no meat. The men of the village of Kwadwo's village were gone. And so they sent Kwadwo and a kid out to hunt. Kwadwo himself wasn't very old, maybe 13 or so at the time. So he took the gun, and this boy that went with him took a machete. And they went out, and this was in the old jungle, and he was easing around a bush. And all of a sudden, something grabbed him on the arm. And he looked down, and there was this python that grabbed him.
Wow.
And was ready to make Kwadwo a snack.
Wow.
And so Kwadwo, I never ever seen Kwadwo mess up, but he dropped his gun. And so then he recomposed himself. He grabbed the snake by the neck, as if the snake has a neck, but right underneath the head, wedged it so it couldn't turn.
Yeah.
And he worked his arm out of. Now, a snake that big has hundreds of needle-like teeth that point backwards. And for him to do that meant he paid no attention to pain.
Wow.
And it's all about achieving the goal, the kind of tough man that he was. So he worked his arm through, he held the snake out, bent over to pick up his gun. And by the time he did, the snake had wrapped around him twice and was up to the thighs. And he took that and he shot the head off.
Wow.
The boy that was with him was so afraid, he dropped the machete and he ran.
Wow.
He left Kwadwo out there to die.
Wow.
And Kwadwo was not very happy with the boy. But Kwadwo said the snake was too heavy to carry out. And I had grown up in Africa, and I had not seen a snake too heavy to carry out. Now I was thinking, this story is too big, even for Kwadwo.
Wow.
And he said the snake was about 10 meters, 11 yards.
Wow.
Looking at that's too big.
That's too big.
And too big. And then it wasn't too big. And when I saw the snake skin, I saw it slowly getting bigger, 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 bigger. And finally, when it started getting smaller again, it was cut off. It was not too big.
Wow. That's a lot.
And so that was Quadjure and the snake. And he was, now we talked about my two best friends in Ivory Coast. As a kid, it was Quadjure, and as an adult, it was Joseph.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing about Kojo and Julia. That's quite amazing to know. Now, tell us, Jim, what was the African response to Jesus? Was there any peculiar feature you noticed among the Africans towards the new approach to salvation and the acceptance of Christ?
Well, the way my parents did it were different than the other missionaries.
Okay.
My dad realized you needed to face the problems. And so he gave the Africans 24 hours. And many of them, they knew that if they accepted Christ and they told their family, they were risking it all.
Yeah.
And that they may lose everything. And Africa is a harsh country, a harsh continent. If you don't have family and friends, it's easy to die.
Absolutely.
Africa, it's not like in the US where you can go find a job.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And so they realized they needed to tell their family and friends. And a lot of times they couldn't explain very well, except they say, God loves me, and I want you to have the same love. And time again, Africans got that finger in the face and said, you are no longer my son. And they would send teams back to visit the family. And because of the bravery of one, so often many knew. And the flames of gospel spread throughout Ivory Coast and beyond. When I would go to church and I would be among those Christians, and I usually feel this particularly strong when we were standing up, one would say, every one of us here had given up, had took risk giving up their lives for Christ. And I was the only one who hadn't. And I was realized that I was in the midst of some incredibly great men of God and women of God. And that was their response. And churches, they grew rapidly.
Wow. That's great. I actually love the response when I read the book. I love the response to the new faith, to the new salvation. I also see that the book is in the making of a TV series. Could you tell us a bit about the progress of it? That'd be fine to know.
It is in the process. We very shortly after we had published the book, a screenwriter, a very established screenwriter, was told about our book, and he wanted to put our book into a TV series. There's too much information for a movie. So he wanted it to be a TV series. And so he wrote the first episode, and he has gone to many movie houses and some of the very top producing movie houses in the world are seriously considering. 4 of them have taken the script and they're in the process of analyzing it. 2 of them have already gone past that now to have asked for the book.
Wow.
There's 2 more that are considering taking the script. There's another one that it's killing them. They are too busy to take it, but they have to keep asking, well, what's going on with this book? And so that's where the book is at. It's a very complicated process. Nobody wants to jump out and say, okay, let's take it. They have to come to where everybody at the same time says, let's take it. So nobody's career can be ruined. But the process is rolling, and it just takes time. Sometimes it takes many months.
Yeah.
What you have not known since last time we have talked to is we entered this book into the biggest book competition, English book competition in the world. The one that produces more children's books than any other, and as well as adult books. That book won. They have first place, second place, and then honorable mention, which is third place.
Wow.
My book won third place in a competition not designed for Christian stuff.
Wow.
It was too good for them to ignore. The stories were too incredible. And so it came in third. And the other book, out of all fiction books, this one right here, it came in third as well in all fiction books.
Wow.
And that's what most of the books entered the competition, entered that group. And it came in third.
Congratulations on that. That's a lot. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. I'm really happy to know about that. Now, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book like yours? What do you tell people in this category? What's your advice for people in this section?
Well, I realize that it's not about how smart I am. It's about what God gives me. So the point is not try to figure out a great story. The point is to listen to God. God, what do you want said? And God will give something. Then the imagination goes to running. So there's that. And it's patience. This book took 40 years. This book, when I started it, the beginning of the story, I wanted to start writing it 15, 20 years ago, but the timing wasn't right. So God doesn't always give everything immediately. Sometimes he does. But the credit goes to God. The struggles go to God. They're all his.
Absolutely.
And it's capturing the vision about what God wants to do. Then the Spirit moves with great power.
Wow. That's great. That's quite fascinating. Thank you so much, Jim, darling, for the fantastic one. It's very amazing. I love it. So, for viewers who would love to get a copy of Jim's book, Because of You, I Lost Everything, I left a link in the description part of this interview for you to get a copy directly on Amazon. Thank you so much, Jim, for accepting the invitation to be
Oh,
featured on English Literature. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
oh, it's been my pleasure. It's an honor to be welcome into Nigeria. It's an honor to be on your show.
Yeah,
And it's not about how great I am. I'm just thankful that God has chosen to love me and to love you. And when I went back to Africa in 2019, God said, come see the people that I love.
mm,
And in Nigeria, there's people God loves.
absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Wait.
Okay.
Bye. All right. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, thank you.